Now I give the floor to John. And Stephen, if you want to add anything, in fact, please, the floor is always yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So that was the first of our speakers, and already we've had a very high energy. We had a very engaging and charismatic speaker, which certainly brought out a number of questions and a number of engagement with delegates. So thank you very much for that. So we now turn to our next speaker, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Category Management in Action with Mr. John Thompson. John has over 25 years experience in global category management with a proven track record of success and delivery. By thinking globally, then acting locally, John combines these skills with the practices learned across different sectors and categories. And John delivers significant cost savings, as well as innovation and service improvement. John has worked in many sectors, including financial services, medical, aerospace, charity, construction, government, and in particular, rail, including the major UK rail infrastructure, High Speed 2. The estimated cost of that project is between 80 and 88 billion. So a very significant piece of work. John is an exponent of the transferable nature of procurement skills that drive improvement in all industries. John is a procurement and supply chain expert with deep hands-on experience, and that's something which I know John wants to talk about and impart to you, give you insight into how he's gone about category management in his role. John's also held in high regard for his engaging presentations. John holds an MBA and is a member of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. So without further ado, hand you over to Mr. John Thompson.
Thank you very much, Steve. Let me just make sure that you can see my screen. So can you, let's get this working then.
Yeah, we've got that.
Right. So can everybody see that now?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. As Steve has spoken to you, my name is John Thompson, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. Today, I'm going to share my experiences of category management with you and try to demonstrate how this change management process can be effective in the largest of organisations. So today, I'm going to use the example of fleet management, or some of you may know it as the provision of company vehicles. So you can see the agenda I have before you. So first of all, I'm going to speak about the challenge. So what was the size and the scope of my task and my experience of the organisation at that point. I'm then going to speak to you about what makes an effective category strategy. And I'm going to identify the three main elements of this and show you how when they are brought together, your strategy will be successful. I'm going to go through the key stages of category management, and I know that these vary across different organisations, but essentially this is a mirror of Kotter's change management process, and it will help you to identify, enable and embed change management within your organisations. I'm then going to speak to you about change management. So, the levers of change. These are the blockers and enablers that category management will allow you to surface and then to move past them within your particular organisations. And then finally, I'm going to speak to you about something called Today, Tomorrow. And this really is a summary of where we started in the process and where we ended up. And it really is a wrap-up which shows you how, using category management, the blockers of change are removed and significant benefit can be delivered to your organisation. So this first slide talks about the challenge. So picture, if you will, a lovely sunny day in leafy Oxfordshire. I drive my car into the car park of Becton Dickinson on my first day in the organisation. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, BD is one of the largest medical technology companies in the world. They have a turnover of $5 billion a year with 150,000 employees, and they are a business that's been in operation for the last 150 years. So the first question of my new boss when I worked into the job was, John, what do you know about the category of fleet? My response, absolutely nothing. Congratulations, my boss says to me, you are now the category manager for fleet across Europe. Go figure, as the Americans love to say. So basically, what fleet looked like across Europe at the time, there were 17 countries, there were 14 different fleet policies, 24 different suppliers, and it was a cost of $19 million a year. So, as I've said to you earlier, on my first day, I knew nothing about fleet, but what I did know was about category management. And using category management, I was able to meet the objectives of identifying opportunities for savings and service improvement. So this slide really talks about an effective category management strategy. So there are many different definitions of what category management is, and you will see this on the right-hand side of the screen. But for me, the essential drivers of category management are strategy, stakeholders, and savings. Savings or service, indeed. So the first of our S's is strategy. So this is basically facts and data, or key pieces of information on the current state of your category. This data comes from a number of sources, such as your finance department. It may come from the internet. And a really good source of where you're spending your money is around your suppliers. So strategy also requires academic rigor. So this is a set of tried and tested practices which allow you to interpret the data that you have before you and change the situation that you're in. And so the speaker before me spoke about a number of category academic disciplines, but some of the examples that I'm talking about is supplier segmentation, supplier preferencing, and also cost benefit activities. So within your strategy, you also need short, medium and long-term goals. So this is about your strategy has to actually deliver something, because if your strategy isn't going to deliver, there's not really a lot of point undertaking it. And the third element of strategy is around practical experience. So there's no substitute for practical experience, and you need to know which of the many tactics that category management offers you, what works and what doesn't in different situations. So the next S that I'm going to talk about to you is stakeholders. Now, stakeholders are key to an effective category strategy. You really need to understand the needs of your stakeholders and bring them on a journey of discovery and success with you. Otherwise, your strategy is doomed to fail. It's about understanding the issues that make their life difficult and offering them constructive solutions. There's also a need to understand who your stakeholders are, who are the people who can help change your strategy, and get those people brought into your strategic process. Now, the final S is about, I call it savings or service. Now, the savings that you're going to deliver or the service improvements that you're going to deliver, these vary greatly depending on the needs of your stakeholders and the particular strategies that you're going to adopt. It's about giving your stakeholders what they want and what they need, what you actually think that not what you think they actually want. So when you combined these 3 S's, this is your key to success. And you'll see the quotation from the European Director of Reward and Recognition for BD, when it basically it shows you what success looks like when the 3 elements of these are successfully combined. Now, the next slide is the key stages of category management. This slide shows you how change is identified, implemented, and embedded across your category strategies. So category management is, in its essence, is a change management process. You can't ignore these steps and you can't miss them out, because if you do, you will end up disappointing your stakeholders and losing credibility and value. So the stages that I've identified in this slide, and you'll see that many of them, they differ from different types of organisations. They're based around identifying and building support for the change management and reducing resistance to the strategic sourcing process. So key to this process is the identifications of quick wins throughout the process. So in all of the stages of your process, it's really important to have strategic wins, but also quick wins, because this keeps your team and your stakeholders motivated to carry on their journey. So for me, the key principle of category management are things like this. So we talk about process thinking. So all of the stages of this process are important. It's very much a customer-driven focus, meeting the needs of your stakeholders. Category management is all about facts and data, because you can't argue with facts and data, and this is what gives people confidence in your strategy. It's also about the elimination of waste as you go along this journey. And at every stage of this process, there is what I call the plan, do, check, act. You keep improving on what you're doing, and you keep reviewing every stage of this process so that you find out what you learn, and then you find out what you can do better in the next stage. And finally, the point of these strategies is they should be transformational. You're taking people on a journey, and if that successful is transformational in giving savings and service improvements, the next time these people have an issue, they're going to invite you back to the table. So here I've identified some of what I call the levers and the blockers of change. So every situation in every category, in every business is different. But using the tools of category management, this allows you to surface the blockers of change and enables you to identify the levers of change that you can pull to help you deliver your desired transformation. That said, some of the blockers and enablers that I've identified here are common in many situations. So here, things like, when we talk about blockers, this is poor communication strategy. As the last speaker alluded, it's all about communication. It's about having a clear, effective strategy and how you communicate that strategy. It's also about identifying cultural bias. So different organisations have got long histories of doing particular activities, and it's about identifying what these biases are and identifying new ways to help them move on to a different set of outcomes. It's important to identify what the levers of change are. So this is the availability of good data that you have, which I spoke about earlier. It's about finding a strong cross-functional team. So the team that I had included members of the HR leadership team, that had the sales and marketing directors of each country that we worked in, and of course it was led by the procurement team, which was myself. But it's also important to have a strong and committed sponsor. So once you have that strong and committed sponsor who's bought into your strategy, then they will act as the ambassador for your strategy when sharing it throughout your organization. So this slide talks about is what I call today and tomorrow. So at the start of the category management that I lead, I always identify the places where we are, but I also ask my team to identify where they want to go at the end of this process. So this is important because it shows them what they're working towards, and it focuses them on the prize. It focuses them on the major strategic prize, but at the same time, as I spoke about earlier, it identifies the quick wins that along the journey are going to lead them on this process. So some of the things we talked about where we started. We talked about monthly rental fees for our vehicles. So this is what we paid every month for the vehicles that we used. And by the end of the process, we adopted a total cost of ownership model, which you spoke about from the last speaker. We had this thing called a user chooser mark, which basically meant that you could basically choose any company vehicle what you wanted. But where we ended up with 3 regional brands that we used across the whole of our 17 European countries. We identified, so because of this disparate policy that we had with our brands, we were spending $19 million a year on fleet, but we weren't getting any money back. But as a result of our category strategies, we were able to secure rebates of around $300,000 a year from the manufacturers that we worked with. When we started our process, we found that the company car allowance was 25% above the market rate. So by doing this market analysis, which we talked about earlier, we identified that we brought our car allowance in line with the market. So as a result of this category strategy, we were able to save $3.1 million over a 3-year period. And we moved we moved to a best-in-class fleet policy where we were able to attract and retain high-performing staff across our businesses. Instead of our fleet becoming a cost to our company, we enabled it to become a resource, so it attracted the brightest and best talent to our organisation. Okay, so that's my presentation about category management in action, and now I'd be pleased to take your questions. Thank you, John. Okay, well, yes, when I spoke to the various functional heads across the 17 countries of Europe, all of them said that their particular markets or their particular strategy was different. But where we were able to bring success was we were able to identify a European-wide fleet policy. So working with the HR leadership team, we identified a set of fundamental principles that were to apply across all of our 17 countries. But at the same time, we identified regional variations that reflected the local conditions of each market. That's a very good point, Steve. So when I started at BD, my first remit was European category manager. So the category management activity that I identified for you here is simply a European-wide strategy. And built on the success of that European strategy, I was then promoted to global category manager. And what I identified from this was that the market for fleet within Europe is very different to the market in the US, and is very different to the markets of Asia. So working on this principle of glocal, acting global but thinking local, the idea was to develop regional fleet strategies but look to areas where we were able to harmonize. A particular example of this was in Europe, we used a company called ALD Automotive. We were also able to partner with their US parent company, which is a company called Wheels. Now, using that partnership, we were able to develop a database which covered the 19,000 vehicles that we had across the US, with I think the 1,700 or 17,000 vehicles that we had across Europe. So we were able to use those synergies to collate our data and manipulate our data, but at the same time implement very different regional strategies.
Yeah, sure. John, I was just wondering, with a strategy for fleet, obviously the marketplace is going to change and there's going to be technology-driven changes in the vehicles that you're buying and environmental regulations. So how far into the future does your strategy look to plan, and sort of, how did you incorporate future changes?
Okay, so I think that is a really good question, and I'll give you an example, because the strategy that we originally developed was a 5-year period. And the reason why we wanted to do that was because when we started the strategy, we had lots and lots and lots of different suppliers. Now, as you'll know, you can't just cancel a lease and then provide somebody with a new company car. You have to let all of the leases tail off over the period of each of these leases. So the strategy was that over a 4 or 5 year period, all of the leases that we currently had would tail off and be picked up by the new supplier. And so at the end of that period, all of the fleet that we had in the US and in Europe would be all with one supplier, so that the next time we delivered our strategy, we would have a strategy that incorporated all of our data and all of our fleet, so it would make the next building blocks of our strategy that much clearer, because we had all that information in one place. So that's the first point. And the second point was that, I'm happy to admit this happened when we first designed our strategy. There was a lot of talk across the globe about the use of diesel engines. So basically, it was identified that at that period of time, diesel engines were the way to go for all types of vehicles. And there was reams and reams of scientific data which basically said, make sure you put all your cars and make them all diesel. Now, so that was the strategy we adopted. So we basically said, we're not going to have petrol, the whole of our BD fleet, we're not going to have petrol cars. They're all going to be diesel. So having made that change to a European-wide edict that we would have diesel vehicles, well, then of course the picture changed, and then 2 years later the data said no, don't have diesel cars. So so by having a strategy that's the medium-term strategy, it allows you to identify changing technology and adjust your strategy accordingly.
Okay. So, John, I have millions of questions for you, but sadly, we're starting to, time will be against us. So I'm going to invite Marina just to say to her, do you have a question for John on your side? And then
Thank you so much, John. It's a very interesting introduction, and one of my favorite categories, because you can really do a lot in it. In this category, there are lots of tools, so all of this diversity can lead to lots of value and money for the company, for the business, and for the stakeholders. I would like to ask you to elaborate on what you just mentioned. But in fact, it's so important. In my opinion, we cannot deal without that. And not a single strategy and category management can be successful without it. This is the loyal and committed sponsor you were mentioning. The person who will promote and help to move on, to push this idea, and to the person who will help with his or her decisions to give the green light for the strategy. Could you elaborate how you involved the sponsors and who was your sponsor in the company of BND?
Okay, so yes, I absolutely agree with your point. So as I spoke to at the start of my presentation, it was my first day at the company, and I was suddenly given this massive change management strategy to deliver. So what I identified was that this isn't something that procurement can do on its own. This is something that the business needs to want to do. And so my task in this, one of the first tasks that I had, was to identify the European leader of recruitment and reward and to sell to him a particular strategy. So what I basically went, and it was a chap called Mike, and I said, Mike, what are your problems around company cars? So Mike basically wrote my strategy for me. He told me all the problems that he had. He told me all the issues that he wanted to get solved. And he introduced, and basically said, these are my issues, go find me a strategy. And from that, it becomes very simple. You compare your problems with the best of what the market has to offer. And so the problems are out there in the market. The answers to your problems are out there in the market. You just have to go out and identify them and then weave them into a strategy that you can roll out across a number of countries.
Okay, but who was the sponsor? Who was your sponsor? So the sponsor was your leader, your direct leader?
My sponsor was the global head of HR in Europe. So the chap who was responsible for recruiting the European staff and rewarding them. And don't forget, company cars are also part of that reward package. He wanted me to identify savings and service improvement in the $19 million a year that he spent on company vehicles. So it wasn't a procurement-led strategy, it was a human resources-led strategy.
Got it. Thank you so much. So in fact, I find out that the sponsor was your main internal customer, right?
Yes. And I also delivered, while I was at Becton Dickinson, I also delivered a $22 million project across marketing, a marketing spend across Europe. And again, it was about identifying the leader of the European marketing category, the leader of the European Marketing Council, and finding out what his problems were and delivering a market-led strategy.
Got it. Thank you so much. It's really so interesting, especially considering the experience of the relationship with the sponsors and the stakeholders. That's really an important point. Thank you so much. Okay, we don't have any questions so far. We can see the words of gratitude in the chat directly to the hosts and to us in the personal messages. We are also really grateful to our participants and delegates and to everybody who joined us today. John and Debbie, do you have anything to add or maybe to say about the Steve, maybe you would like to add something about John's speech, and I think that we should conclude.
Okay, I just wanted to say it was very powerful, John, when you mentioned that how transferable category management is, and in fact that you can use it regardless of, in fact, something you've never done before. And I thought that was incredibly powerful because, you know, people can be very shy and very scared about getting into the, shall we call it, the marketing spend or the HR agencies if you've never done it before. And of course, you know, the way to do that is with category management skills. It gives you those standard building blocks to get started. And I certainly, my experience was at the Olympic Games, where we were negotiating with artists and performers and, you know, sports equipment, stuff we'd never done before, I'd never done before. And it was category management that helped me follow that, you know, the steps to get me into things I'd never come across before and be successful at it. So, yeah, sorry.
I was just going to back that up, Steve. It's like, you know, I spent, you know, category management as a, you know, I've worked in a number of industries. I bought space rockets and put satellites in orbit. I bought fleet, and I bought marketing, and I've done building projects. But, you know, and when I've done all of these particular projects, I wasn't an expert in the particular market, but using the tools of category management, I was able to start with some basic principles that I outlined in my presentation, and it very quickly enables you to get a complete overview of what that market is, and most importantly, to identify the problems to any identify the solutions to any particular problems that you may have. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So my thank yous extend to, of course, the speakers that have been with us today. Both of them were hugely engaging and entertaining and gave us lots of insights and information, which I'm absolutely sure in real life are going to be very beneficial. My thank you to working with our translators. Thank you very much. I don't know how you do it, but you do an amazing job. And of course, my thank you to the experts and to Marina at IPSM. So we have another event we're going to do. This one was hugely subscribed, and we were absolutely delighted with that. So we're going to do another one, and I think the next one, Marina, is outsourcing in April.
Yes, outsourcing, the topic of outsourcing and how it can be used in the procurement, outsourcing of the procurement, in fact. The event will be held on the 15th of April. We are ready to it. We'll announce it as soon as possible, and the speakers as well. And we will be happy if you register for our further events. We'll have 3 more events. The next one will be about outsourcing in May, and in June we'll have events which we will tell about later. And also I'd like to mention that we, IPSM company and Procurement Central company, we are happily answering any of your questions, any of your requests. We are conducting corporate trainings and the trainings in the open format. It may be, well, even live in Ukraine and online, of course, if you wish. We've got huge experience in online events last year in various formats. And I think that, Stephen, you are conducting successful online events for different clients and customers for different requests.
Indeed, yes. Indeed. I mean, maybe one day, I know John has been to Kiev, so...
Yes, lovely part of the world, lovely part of the world.
And so I'm keeping my fingers crossed one day, Marina, that I will also travel there. But until then, it's going to be virtual. And again, thank you to everybody who's dialed in today. We've really enjoyed listening and engaging with each other. And I hope everybody has enjoyed listening.
Yes, and see you soon. And we are waiting for you for the workshop on the 15th to 17th of July in Kiev. This will be a live training. The discount and the promo code are in the chat, and also we'll send it out. And we see you. Goodbye. See you soon.
Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you so much that you joined us. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
До свидания.